And let's start with, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Jana, may I get a roll call, please?
Ms. Bucco?
Present.
Mr. Kessler?
Here.
Mr. Reichman?
Here.
And can I get an approval of tonight's agenda?
I'd like to make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
And I will second it.
Mr. Kessler?
Yes.
Mr. Reichman?
Yes.
Ms. Bucco?
Yes. And how about a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting on August 18th, 2021?
I will make a motion to approve last meeting on August 18th, 2021.
And I will second that.
Mr. Reichman?
Yes.
Mr. Kessler?
Yes.
Ms. Bucco?
Yes. We have two cases on the meeting agenda tonight. The first is Symmes 87-8, Governor's Hill, U.S. Bank ATM. May we hear from staff, please?
Yes, good evening. Brian Snyder, Hamilton County Planning and Development. You should have a copy of the staff report that was prepared for this case. As you stated, this is a final development plan modification for a 1987 zone change. This is property that is located on Governor's Hill Drive, west of Mason and south of Governor's Hill Drive, north of Chapel Square. There's an extensive history on this site beginning in 1987, going through I believe construction of the building later that year, 1988, or 1988, sorry, and then some modifications that have taken place to the parking and signage that there are several cases for that beginning in 2007 and ending earlier this year for both freestanding and building signage. The requested modification that's before you tonight is for construction of a two-bank drive-through remote transaction area. Not an ATM, an actual real full drive-through for bank transactions. So,
Brian, just for clarification, what does that mean?
well, at an ATM, you pull up and you've got a machine. This is actual like you would get from a bank teller.
Like it's
there's
pneumatic
a tube.
tube?
Yep, pneumatic tube, exactly.
That goes somewhere in the building?
Into the building, yes.
Okay.
And it would extend out into the parking lot to service these two transaction areas.
Thank you.
No problem. So the area that is being proposed for these is currently parking. They're proposing removing some parking spaces, adding these two lanes with the required stacking areas for both lanes. The resolution that was originally approved for this site included 5 conditions. The proposal would not violate any of those conditions. It would also comply with all the requirements of the zoning resolution as it relates to setbacks in size and height. However, there were a couple of zoning compliance issues, one with wall signage. If you can see the elevations of this proposal, there are signs on all 4 sides of both transaction stations. The zoning resolution only permits signs to be on one side of these transaction stations at a rate of 1 square foot per foot of frontage. If these are considered structures, there's no accessory structures in planned office districts. They are considered structures, just like we had with the ATM in Harper's station down the street. So they are permitted to have 6.7 square feet on one of the 4 facades of the structure. They're proposing signs on all 4 sides of the structure with a total of 21 square feet. So that's an issue. And then they are also proposing, the applicant is also proposing a directional sign that would be 32 square feet and 6.2 feet, 6 1/4 foot in height. The zoning resolution allows directional signs to be 4 square feet and 4 feet in height. So they're 28 square feet over and 2.5 feet taller, or 2 1/4 foot taller than what is permitted by the zoning code for their proposed directional sign. Other than that, the actual structures themselves would be pretty far away from the nearest residential areas on the other side of Mason Road. I see no issue with that, and they did submit a parking analysis indicating that they've got way more parking than they need to comply with zoning. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Could you refresh my memory as to what we decided as it related to the one in Harper's Point? I know we didn't allow a little thing on top, but,
I believe it was two sides. I think they had a stripe on the side and another stripe on the other side that said ATM down the side with, or I'm sorry, it said Chase down the side with the Chase logo. I believe it was just two sides. I'm not,
I think
I
you're
know
right.
it wasn't 4.
right. It was not four.
How about the square footage of those compared to what was permitted versus what was allowed?
I don't recall. It was pretty small because it was just the side reveal from basically like a couple feet above the ground to a couple feet below the top of the structure.
Are any of the signs going to be illuminated?
I don't believe so. You can, I think it looks like they're either just decals or painted on the sides of the structure.
Right. And
The applicant
drive-through?
can answer that for sure, but it doesn't appear to be any kind of internally illuminated cabinets or anything like that.
And the directional sign as well?
The directional sign looks
Yeah.
like a kind of a standard sign out in the parking lot. I don't believe it is unless they would externally illuminate it.
Okay.
And that would be located as you come in the drive from Chapel.
I think it's closer to the building, like if you're circling around the building, I think it's pointing you to the drive-through. So there's a drive that goes around all four sides of the two buildings. And I think it's there that will point you back to get in line to go to that, so you know where to start from, I think.
Is there anything that you're aware of with this particular site that would warrant the need to have a sign so big versus what's permitted?
Like I said, I think it's just to tell you where the entrance to the facility is. I mean, if you're already up by the building, especially if you have signage on the actual structure itself, I don't see a need for greater than 4 square feet now.
Thank you.
And there's no plans to do any changes with any of the plants or trees or anything?
I believe they're relocating a couple of trees out of an area adjacent to the parking that they're removing, but they are showing that being relocated, so.
Okay.
So US Bank has a sign on the building itself, correct?
I believe so, yeah. 2 signs, one facing the north and the south.
U.S. Savings Bank.
What did I say? Oh, US Bank, I'm sorry.
Any other questions for Brian at this time?
Nope.
I assume the applicant is here. Can we hear from the applicant?
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Good evening. Bill Schock with KBA Architects. As far as a few of the questions that I heard, well, the signage will not be illuminated, neither the ground-mounted sign, directional sign, nor the signage on the ATM. There is LED lighting in the canopy over that for security, but no, the sign itself is not backlit or lit.
If this is a manned versus an ATM, if this is a manned drive-through, what kind of hours are we talking about?
9 to 5, just typical banking hours.
Okay.
Maybe 6 on Friday. And as far as the directional sign, we have no problem going to the 4 feet square.
Okay.
That was strictly a scaling issue on our drawing, so 4 feet is no issue at all.
How about with respect to the maximum height? Is that a problem?
No, we'll match whatever zoning requires for that. And the signage on the units themselves, that's strictly what that supplier has provided for Union Savings Bank. If we're required to eliminate the signs on 3 sides, we're open to that, but we would like at least on the back side, and if possible on the front side, just so as you're coming from the other direction, you would know it is Union Savings Bank. But if worst to worst, we'd go with just the back side.
I have a couple of questions. I did visit the site today. It looks like the project that we're reviewing this evening is already in progress.
They buried the tubes because of timing.
Okay.
And then they realized that's at their own risk.
Okay. Also, you may or may not know the answer to this, the ownership of the building.
I don't know that.
Is US Bank a tenant, or do they own the building?
They own the building.
Okay.
At least some entity of US Bank, or
Okay.
Union Savings Bank.
Does anybody know who's responsible for the parking lot? The reason I'm asking is, two things stood out to me. One, that it was already in progress, and two, that the landscaping is a mess.
That is Union Savings Bank, yes.
So that's their responsibility?
Yes.
Okay.
And they are in process of repaving the entire site, which is, they're trying to get the paving in before the plants close this winter, so
Okay.
they're attempting to get everything cleaned up by then.
Well, it seemed like there were, I mean, and again, I'm not sure what's required there. I'm sure but there's almost nothing there. I mean, there's a plant at either end of each island, 300 feet apart. So I don't know if that's what's approved or not. I don't have any other questions. Does anybody else?
I do not.
I don't know if anybody from the public is here or not, but I'm going to open it up to the public. Do we have anybody who wants to speak on behalf of this project in the affirmative?
Actually, I did have one question for you. Just in regard to, because it seems like this is pretty far away from the building.
Yes.
So from a security standpoint for, transactions, approve Symmes 87-8 Governor's Hill, U.S. Savings Bank, not ATM, remote transaction with the modifications previously mentioned to reduce the size of the directional sign to meet the zoning standard and to allow up to 2 signs on the device itself.
Within the zoning standards.
Within the
sizes.
zoning standards, thank you.
So the zoning standards only allow one sign on one facade, so there is no zoning standard for a second facade. I think the 2 facades that you're intending to approve are the
Front and the back.
the front and the back of the structure, 2 wide facades, and the 2 short facades would be no signage at all.
That's correct.
So the front and the back, and they do call them out as front and back on their plan, so allow 2 signs on the structure, 1 on each, the front and the back, something like that.
Right.
And I guess not to, since 2 are not standard, not to exceed.
Each sign should be within the standard.
So each sign has to be 6.7 square feet.
Or less.
Or less.
Understood, got it.
I'll second that.
Ms. Bucco?
Yes.
Mr. Kessler?
Yes.
Mr. Reichman?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, our second case is Symmes number 6-87, Enterprise Rent-A-Car. Brian, you're up.
Brian Snyder again, Hamilton County Planning and Development. We have a staff report for this case as well. This is final development plan modification for Symmes 6-87. This is a final development plan to allow conversion of the existing commercial building, a former restaurant building, into a car sales use. So this would be Enterprise car sales, not a rent-a-car location. This would be a place where they're selling the cars. The history of this case is long. I won't go into it. There's a number of properties along Fields Erdel and Governor's Way that all went through zone changes in the past. This is one of them. This was originally an Old Country buffet and was most recently an Indian restaurant. The zoning resolution allows for car sales uses in the retail district. However, I jump ahead in the staff report to a section where we describe the proposed car sales use findings on page 4. We put that in there essentially to state the difference between when you get a final development plan for a PUD approved for a parking lot for a restaurant or a regular retail versus when you get it approved for car sales. We've had this issue with the Honda dealership down the street most recently. where we went through a final development plan to allow them to convert into a car sales lot. They also had some building modifications, which this project does not have. They're not proposing any modifications to the building other than to punch a couple of holes in it for service bays. But the footprint is not changing. The layout of the parking is not changing. However, they are taking what was formerly a commercial building with a regular parking lot and introducing car sales onto that, which includes outdoor sales or outdoor storage of cars for sale. So all of those uses, when they move into a planned unit development, are going to come before this commission for a final development plan modification to ensure that car sales was consistent with the intent of the original PUD. So that's what gives you the authority to consider this, whether you feel like it is consistent with the intent. So we consider this as staff, in the staff report, as part of a regular final development plan modification. We consider the resolution from the county commissioners that included 6 conditions. The proposed development would be consistent with those 6 conditions. There are a number of zoning compliance issues, so I'll go into those briefly, and then we can discuss them more if you want. There is a 20-foot parking setback requirement in the planned retail district in the zoning resolution. The parking doesn't comply with the 20-foot setback. There's an issue with the site plan that was submitted. Just in looking at it on Cagis, which is not 100% accurate, it appears that there's more room than they show on the site plan, and what we have in the packet, in your packet, is an architect site plan, not an engineered or surveyed site plan, not based, I believe, not based on a survey of the property. So it may be that the site plan that was submitted was a little bit off. The staff report went with the measurements that we found on Cagis, just based on what it looked like from the aerial, and the right-of-way lines and property lines. Either way, they're showing it being short, and we agree that it is short. They don't have a 20-foot setback for the parking from Governor's Way. Obviously, that parking's been there for a long time, since before the 20-foot setback was instituted. I don't see an issue with having it. As we've discussed before, the minimum streetscape buffer is 10 feet. They appear to have more than 10 feet, so they can provide the full streetscape buffer. The extra setback, I don't think, would benefit anybody, and it would require the complete removal of that entire row of parking, because where the building's located, they wouldn't be able to replace it further back. There's a similar issue with the setback of the building. Like I said, I don't see this as being an issue. Based on Cagis, it looks like there's at least 40 feet between the property line and the building, where they're showing, I believe, 20 or less on the site plan that was submitted. I think that that's an error in the site plan. I don't see this as being an issue anyway, because the building is where it is, and they're not proposing to move it. Freestanding sign, they do have a freestanding sign. They did have a freestanding sign for the previous use out on Fields Erdel. There is a panhandle from this property that goes all the way up to Fields Erdel, and the sign is within the panhandle, so it's on property that is owned by this property owner. It's shown on a final development plan. It's been permitted for years. They're proposing 2 options, which I guess you have the choice of choosing which one to approve, since they've submitted both. There's one where they're completely replacing the sign, it looks like, with a new sign at the same height in the same location. I'm sorry, actually a little bit bigger, but in the same location. And then there's another option where they're just refacing the existing sign, keeping the brick base and just replacing the cabinet, or the face of the cabinet, with a new face. I believe that both comply with the zoning resolution in terms of height and square foot area. So again, I believe it's up to you as to which one you prefer, since they've submitted you 2 options. As far as wall signage, this property does technically have 2 frontages, as it faces and has a panhandle that fronts on Fields Erdel, and one that they have frontage along Governor's Way as well. They're proposing 80 square foot sides on both the north and southern facades of the building, the south being the back of the existing building. The sign that they're proposing on the north facade would be permitted. 124.5 square feet of signage is permitted on the northern facade of the building, and they're proposing 80. If the zoning resolution allows for secondary frontage, frontages to have signs at 0.75 square feet per foot of frontage. So based on the length of the building, they would be allowed 62.25 square feet of signage on the back facade facing Governor's Way. So the 80 square foot sign that they're proposing is bigger than they're allowed, so it would need a variance. And then also staff points out that there are very few, if any, signs facing towards Governor's Way, especially after you pass after you pass Royal Point Drive. So I think there's a couple of facing Governor's Way at the corner. Are all the planned districts. Before that are all the unplanned retail districts where there are no restrictions, so they can place signs there at their discretion. Those businesses can. All the way down to Union Cemetery, I don't believe there's another sign facing towards Governor's Way, and it's generally not been viewed as a retail corridor because there are residential uses on the other side of Governor's Way. So you do have the authority to restrict signage on that side, so you may want to decide whether signage facing towards Governor's Way is appropriate or not, given the lack of signage facing that direction. The streetscape buffer that's required along Governor's Way doesn't appear to have been installed. There's very little landscaping there. As I said, there is enough room to comply with the code, and the applicant has submitted a plan indicating their desire to comply or their willingness to comply with the zoning resolution. I just briefly looked at the plan. I didn't get it until this afternoon, and it appears the numbers are probably correct, but the types are probably not. The actual trees and shrubs, I don't think they're canopy trees that they're proposing, but if they're willing to comply and you require them to comply, we can work with them as staff on coming up with the right types of trees and shrubs, and I don't believe that would be an issue, but the applicant can answer that question. There's an issue that staff brought up with just the fact that Governor's Way, again, is not generally viewed as a retail corridor. They're proposing to place cars for sale along Governor's Way, and having those cars facing towards Governor's Way with the signs on them and any other, decorations that they have being for sale may seem out of place because there's not any of that anywhere else on that section of Governor's Way. You do have the authority to restrict that, to prohibit that, or allow only customers and employees to park on that section if you'd like. And then the parking analysis, we get into this issue a lot with car sales. They generally don't need as many spaces as the code requires. They submitted a parking analysis that showed 2,000 square feet of sales area. Instead, that they were required to have 10 spaces for the customers, and they provided 12 spaces for employees as well. They submitted a parking analysis that showed the areas that they used for the parking calculation, but I'm not sure if they calculated office areas as office and sales areas as sales. That's not how we do it. I described in the staff report how we do calculate that. Parking analysis for this type of use, if you have offices and sales areas, that's all part of your sales business, and you're required to provide 1 to 200 for the whole thing. Without separating out specific offices from other areas of sales. So the number of spaces that they're required to provide is 42, not, I believe they're showing 22 spaces for customers and employees. They're required to have 42 for customers and employees. They have 120 spaces on the site, so 78 of them would be allowed to be used for display. Their site plans that they submitted, they wanted 99 of the spaces to be display. Again, I don't see any reason why they can't meet the requirements, but this commission has supported or granted modification to this parking requirement in the past for both Honda and McCluskey, just based on the fact that car sales just generally don't need as many spaces as the code requires as a use. So finally, that is it. That's all I have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I drove this site today too. See, when you're retired, you have time to do these things.
So you tried.
That's good, what you're supposed to do, right?
And in driving through the parking lot on what I guess is the front side of the building, it was kind of like a maze. I mean, there's some weird little, I don't know, abutments, except I felt like I was driving around in a labyrinth in some ways. Are the spaces we're talking about dedicated to this particular site?
Yes, they're all on this property, so this
Okay.
property
They're
does have
not
a...
shared with anybody
No.
else?
There may be a shared parking agreement, but I doubt it since they're showing them as being display spaces, but this is, all the spaces that they're talking about are on property that they own.
Okay. I also noticed that there were other people parking in the back as well. So obviously, if we discuss employee parking in the back, in terms of the number of spaces in the back, if we said employees, that's only employee parking, is it adequate?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it depends on what number you require them to provide for customers and employees, but yes, there's more than enough. And that would, if you require the 42 that the code requires, all of the spaces in the back would be employees and customers, and they probably need some coming up the side as well, or in the front. Actually, that's where they're showing it, is where they want the customers to park is in the front of the building. But yes, there's enough.
Okay.
They're not planning on doing repair work or anything like that in this building?
It doesn't, they don't say that. I don't know that, I mean, auto body is a type of repair work that's only permitted in industrial zone, but regular repair, auto mechanic type repair is permitted in the retail zone. They do show 2 bays, but what they're showing is a car wash bay and another bay where I believe that they just pull the cars in to celebrate with the people who just bought them.
Right. I guess that my specific question is, we don't anticipate them to use pneumatic, air handling, things that are going to be noisy to the residential areas around it.
The car wash itself might have some noise associated with it, depending on what kind of car wash it is. We've had that issue in the past.
Greg, do you have any questions for Brian?
Not right now, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
May we hear from the applicant, please? If you'd state your name and address for the record.
Yeah, Chris Jolly with Darren Ranker Architects, 5925 Wilcox Place, Dublin, Ohio.
And Jennifer Hendrick with Enterprise Holdings, 4600 Macaulay Place, Cincinnati, Ohio.
To address a few of the items, as noted, we did provide a landscape plan after getting the staff report, so that was a late add, but we are more than willing to work with staff to properly address the right species for those items, and we are able to meet the quantities as they are laid out in the zoning for that buffer area there along the south. As far as the parking, so the use here, being car sales, the amount of customers are anticipated, they wouldn't really ever need more than probably 9 spaces for customers at any time based upon their business case and their other experiences with other sites of similar size. So we wouldn't only really need more than 9 for customers, and then they have about 12 employees, which is reflective of what we provided. And the desire is to have the customers more in the front. That's where they're going to enter the building. And we kind of feel if you have the vehicles stored in the back as well for car sales, I would think those would be a little bit less of a nuisance since they're not going to be coming and going throughout the day if it was a customer or employee space, where there can be a little more of a stagnant vehicle there. And also in the addition of the buffer there, adding that landscape buffer will kind of add some screening there as well.
And just so you understand, we don't use stickers, we don't use signs on our cars for display. So our thought was, those are the most aesthetically pleasing vehicles to put back there. Our employee cars are company cars as well, so they're newer model cars that they drive. So that back Governor's Way row would have newer cars, no stickers or displays. We don't do that in our operation.
So from Governor's Way, I wouldn't see any advertising or...
You would just see newer cars.
I'm not going to see the little thing that blows up and stands upright and falls back in the air.
No, we don't do those either. Yeah,
So you say right now, but...
Nobody out with the sign. It would just be newer model cars sitting on display.
With respect to the parking, is this the parking plan with the multicolors?
Yes.
Can you explain what I'm looking at with the 3 colors?
So yeah, the yellow at the front is for customer designated spaces. The magenta color is for the employees, and then the blue is for the car sales.
What's the number of cars you anticipate being for sale on site?
We have 99 designated, so that's the desired amount.
Is that typically maxed out with the other locations, or is it usually less?
For this location, that would be high end. You would probably see about 75 on any given day, but we may have 100 on display. We have metrics and we have pretty good reporting that tells us customers' throughput that come in and out of the building, our employee needs. We know, I think we've put 12 employee cars, but we're going to have 10 employees at max, usually 8 to 10 at the site. So we plan for some visits from some other folks outside of there, but we have more than we need on employee cars. Customers, you know, we tend to, we're not a bigger used and new car dealership, right? We sell our rental cars primarily out of these locations. So our transaction, our traffic is pretty minor compared to most dealerships. You'll see up to 20 customers a day in a 10-hour span. So typically a couple customers every hour. So, so the customer, I understand the calculations for customer parking. It's just, it is excessive for what our use is. So we would ask the commission to consider our use in calculating the parking for this site.
Question about the plan where you show the, I guess it's the magenta employee cars. There's 7 on the roadside and 6. But when I look at this other drawing, it shows the service bay. Is that what's to the left of the 6 magenta?
Correct, yeah, and that's the entrance to the car wash bay.
Okay.
And that is a manual car wash bay, so there's, there would be like a power washer in there. They would have an air compressor for filling tires, but generally they would be doing those operations with the door closed.
What other type of service might be provided in there?
It's just preparing vehicles, and it's really, in this operation for us, it's touching up. A lot of them are cleaned third party. So it's touching vehicles, spraying them off when they get dirty from the weather, vacuuming them out, and air compress, you know, filling the tires when the air goes low.
But no repairs.
No repairs, no oil changes. We do that all through a third party. All maintenance is through a third party.
What's the rationale for having 6 of the employees up against the building instead of having all 13 along Governor's Way?
Just being that it's next to that service bay, so you're not having the newer cars right where there's more traffic coming in and out of the back of the building there.
Question for you, Brian. A plan in that streetscape buffer. Will I be able to see cars if I'm driving along Governor's Way with that buffer, and if it's in compliance with the landscape plan?
Yeah, you will. Similar to the way you can see the backs of the buildings further down Governor's Way. There are streetscape buffers behind most of the other buildings as you head down the road. You still see the building. I mean, if the landscaping grew perfectly and it didn't die and it didn't have to be replaced, it may block all of that parking in 20 years. But the point of streetscape buffer is not to actually block, it's just to beautify the street.
Okay.
So that's why canopy trees are required. You're not allowed to use evergreen trees in a typical streetscape. They did down the street because it's the back of the buildings where the loading docks are, which they were purposely trying to screen. But a general streetscape buffer, the point of it is to make it look better, but not to block the buildings, because businesses want to be seen. So that's not the intent. The intent of the shrub requirement is to block headlights from the parking lot when they are using it in the dark and face towards the street. That's the reason that shrubs are also required in the streetscape buffer.
Okay.
Speaking of lights, are there any changes to the lighting plan with this use versus the existing?
We'd be maintaining the existing lighting, but upgrading it to LED.
How about in terms of hours of service?
You'll have to submit a lighting plan that complies with the code.
Sure.
As part of that, they can do that. We can verify that it's complies with the code. I don't believe that if it said it anywhere in their submission, I didn't see it. Otherwise, we would have mentioned it in the staff report. It does require a plan. It's 0.5 foot candles at all the property lines, including the street.
Sure.
So in Brian's discussion, he addressed the rear-facing sign on the building and the fact that it's not compliant with our current zoning standards. If we didn't approve that, how would you feel about that?
So just the backstory for why we have that there. Obviously, it is visible. We do think that
Right.
street is traveled pretty well. When I was there this evening, maybe we weren't there at the same time, but there was a lot of traffic on that road. So I don't know that our goal is to capture customers. It's more, a lot of the apps for navigation today will point you through Governor's Way to get to the site, depending on traffic, and it can get kind of confusing back there. So, you know, we can comply with not the building sign. I guess a question for you would be, is it as objectionable for you if maybe we had a directional ground-mounted sign at that entry in the rear off Governor's Way? A little less of a profile, but directs someone that may be directed back there how to get into our space?
4 square feet and 4 feet in height. If you're talking about a freestanding sign, then we're getting into the county commissioner's resolution, which the zoning commission doesn't have the authority to change conditions of. The signage, freestanding signage requirements are pretty strict in the approval.
You said 4 square feet?
4 square feet, 4 feet in height.
Okay.
They're permitted. They're not considered to be freestanding signs because of the size.
And there's nothing for, are those actually called directional, or are they called?
Yeah, they're
okay.
called directional signs, that's right.
So it would be something like it said Enterprise with an arrow?
Yes, you're allowed to have your logo on it, but at 4 square feet, yes. So Enterprise with an arrow would probably be right.
Kind of like the one, well, I don't know if it's on there, but yeah, it is in the bottom left-hand corner of the U.S. Savings Bank, but 4 feet.
Yeah, so honestly, we don't expect that the rear sign is going to improve our business in any way.
Right.
It would improve the customer experience and probably frustrate less customers, which we're always looking to do, right? But, you know, if it is something that just can't happen here, we can complain.
Yeah, you know, I'll tell you my thought on it, and that is, I certainly understand your point, but my primary concern is the people across the street whose front doors and garages and whatnot are directly across from that, and that's going to be lighting up their front doors and garages all night, or at least, till you shut them down, shut the lights down. It's, I would feel for them.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that. I mean, because it's residential directly across the street, I think, we're trying to be particularly sensitive. We understand you're a business. We want business in Symmes Township. At the same time, I try and put myself in the residents' shoes as well. So I think some of the things that we're going to talk about are going to be trying to be sensitive to the residents on the other side of the street.
I understand. Can I ask?
Sure.
Brian, is that 4 square feet? Is that done? Like, is there any variance process for that?
You would have to ask the commission.
Okay.
4 square feet is what the code allows,
Okay.
without a variance.
You heard the last discussion. We think the 4 square feet is pretty reasonable, so I think you'd have to make a pretty compelling argument, which, at least what I'm hearing from you is, it'd be nice, but it's not an absolute. We're not going into the business and, you'll have a dilapidated project otherwise,
You have to keep in mind the
I prefer to
neighborhood.
word it that it would be such a benefit for our customers and our patrons of the area, and I just don't know. I mean, we can certainly look at the 4 square feet. I just don't know if that's going to be large enough to capture them, because the traffic was moving at a pretty good pace back there this evening, so.
Yeah, I mean, I drive it all the time.
Yeah.
You can drive at a very quick pace or a very slow pace.
I'm sure.
Well, and, when I went there this afternoon, I drove down Governor's Way to get there, and I wasn't quite sure. I actually turned west of the site and went through the labyrinth on the north side of the building to find it. So if there's a direct entry right next to it, I mean, I think I can certainly appreciate that a modest directional sign saying Enterprise is right here might be advantageous, and certainly, in my opinion, would be much more preferable than putting some big Enterprise sign on the back of the building when nobody else in that area has one.
Yeah.
And it's not really currently standard.
Do you have a preference of on the two options, I guess, you provided us on the freestanding sign?
So our preference is our branded sign, which is the one with the green shield, the new sign versus the retrofit. Yeah, that's our preference. It's our, we're a national company. That's our national trade dress. But we also, if there was objections to it, we wanted to show you the refacing.
So these are my two options?
Those are the two options.
From my perspective, just looking at them, that has more pop to me.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, but we need a little work on the brickwork there.
I didn't want to
You're being very diplomatic.
Brian brings up in his report something about, he doesn't know whether you're planning on using loudspeakers.
No loudspeakers. No loudspeakers, no stickers, no signs, no balloons.
Okay.
So, and no wavy.
No wavy
And the wavy things. And you'll use the service bays with the doors closed.
Yes. And like I said, it is a very, for this particular operation, it is a quick transaction of touching up the vehicles for the most part.
Right.
The bay in the front, the celebration room, that is really just where we pull in vehicles, maybe take pictures with customers.
So it's not a drive-through, they're two separate.
Two separate, yeah.
Okay.
One's to touch up the vehicle's cleanliness, the other is to celebrate with our customers, take their pictures, and let them ride off of the vehicles. So.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant?
I do not.
Do we have anybody from the general public that would like to speak? Okay, if you could come up one at a time, please state your name and address ahead of time. I guess typically we do those that are for. Is there anybody that's for?
I don't think we're either for or against.
Okay, you just general comments, okay?
My name's Steve Snyder. I'm the HOA president for the villas across the street in the back. I thought he was looking at the drawing, but obviously this is the villas of Royal Point. And so I'm a commercial real estate broker by trade of about 46 years, which gives you an idea of my age. But in any case, I'm usually for something like this, and I'm always for progress. So in the line of progress, we just want to work something out that works for everybody. So we're not saying no to this. We've seen a number of restaurants come and go. I'm thinking there's been 4 there since the buffet was there originally, and most of them have failed. And a side effect of that is the condition of the back of the property. We deal with a lot of weeds all the time in the summer, and I took some pictures today, but I didn't print them or anything. But there's a trash receptacle in the back. There's stuff all over the ground now, so we welcome the fact that somebody's going to make it a little bit better. Our issues, though, are the sign on the building in the back, which you've already addressed to some degree. Our other issue is just being able to see everything that's going on, and the concept of new cars all in the back. The front of the building is where the business is done, and we would like to keep it that way if possible. We understand the bay in the back, but what we're really looking for is some type of buffer. And I realize there's 2 types of landscaping that Brian has addressed here. We would be really interested, we don't think a fence is really appropriate, but we would be really interested in something like very tall, not necessarily the pine trees like are behind Coles, but more like a shrub that's very tall. They get 10, 12, 15 feet tall, and you put them very close together so you can't see through them at all. And that would block our driveway, which is directly behind this building, for ingress and egress. The best example I can give you of that barrier that I'm thinking of, some of you may or may not know it, but where Pfeiffer Road comes out onto Montgomery, right across the street is a development that Zicka Homes did. And they covered the whole front with those pines. Something like that is what I'm referring to. So those are our concerns. As far as a sign, most of the people that will be looking for enterprise coming that direction are probably coming from the Frisch's end. So when they get there, I'm thinking a sign, I can't show you very well in the drawing here. There's a drive in the back of the building. Right there at where that driveway is, if it could kind of face towards the west.
Do you have a drawing you want to come up here and show us?
Yeah.
You can put it here so we can all see.
Yeah, this is the back of the building. So that's over here.
Does that help at all?
Yeah, let me get a pen. It's easier to show you where we're at here. The drive that goes into this is right here. Okay, that's the only ingress. or egress or ingress to their property. So if they just put their sign here, and we had a buffer all along this way, anybody coming this way is going to see that sign, and then they can slip under that driveway. That makes any
Okay.
sense?
It does.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be that big. And if it's faced at this angle, this way, it's going to be seen. People looking for it's not, most
Yeah,
likely not.
I
gonna
mean,
come
usually
in this
those things
direction.
are perpendicular to the street, you know.
So when you say 4 square feet, you're talking roughly 2 by 2 or something like that.
Or 4 by 1 if it's just an
Yeah.
enterprise with an arrow.
Oh, we've all seen them. the signs,
Yeah.
seriously. But we would really urge you to cause some kind of buffer to be here that really blocks us from the building, because we're right here as we go in and out. And everybody here, we weren't notified of the Chevy place being approved because we're so far away. If we had-
McCluskey?
McCluskey. If we had been, we would have been here to talk about some things like traffic, because we know we're going to expect a lot. There's a sign as you come off the interstate in front of the subway place right across the bushes. What's it called?
Potbelly?
Yeah, Potbelly. There's a small sign that says no through truck traffic,
Yeah.
but we know that that's not,
On Governor's Way?
that they don't really follow it. A lot of times we'll get semis that get lost.
People use it as a
Well-
cut through too.
And then they have to make a right turn there, and you're done.
Yeah.
Just taking my identity.
I gotta tell you the truth, I couldn't see it from back there anyway. My eyesight doesn't work even with these.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Brian, before the next gentleman comes up, a question for you. We talked about screening versus streetscape, and he's obviously in favor of a screening versus the streetscape. In light of where their entrance is in relation to the building, could you have a partial screening, streetscape hybrid? Or is that not doable?
Unless you make it up right now, so it's something we can enforce. I mean, you can choose to require a boundary buffer instead of a streetscape buffer along Governor's Way, because there is a difference in boundary buffers versus streetscape buffers. I believe more trees, the ability to use evergreens, and more shrubs, if I'm not mistaken. But it is the intent of the type and number is to buffer rather than to beautify. So, and there's a difference in the two for a reason. So if you require a boundary buffer instead of a streetscape buffer, I don't know that it's that much more than what you get this way, but they can do evergreens instead of just canopy trees. So that is something you can require, though.
Okay. Thank you. You're on.
Thank you. My name's Thomas Day. I live at 12020 Maximum Way, which is across from this property.
Are you a member of the association?
Absolutely. Everybody that actually lives there is part of the HOA.
Okay.
So I'll reinforce what he said, but my one concern was really in a broader nature, the zoning aspect of that entire area, the PUD aspect and that sort of thing. You know, Governor's Way is a dividing line between the retail and, in this case, it's single-family attached housing. With what's been across Governor's Way since I've lived there about 7 years, it hasn't been really too much of an issue. The bigger issues are when there's servicing being done perhaps on the buildings, and there are trucks and compressors running all day long. Those units, you know, can basically vibrate with whatever the noise is out there. So that's a concern. But as far as what kind of business goes there, I don't have any particular care, actually, one way or another, what goes on that property, just as long as we're buffered on our side from, you know, that type of thing. I'm also wondering, since most of the car service stuff is up along Fields Erdel, why this would be appropriate for a car lot. It could get to be somewhat of an issue, depending on what kind of things are going to be done to those cars, but just the fact that you've got all those cars right across the street, or you see them every day, obviously here, because our main drive comes right out to where that sign is being proposed. So anything that would interfere with that, with the living that we do over here, would be an issue from my standpoint. I know the Honda dealership went in. That doesn't seem to have been too much of a problem, at least from my standpoint. I am living in the units that are closest to Governor's Way. The main issue that typically arises is lighting. You put the light up very high, and then you put some LEDs in there, which are state-of-the-art, and it gets pretty bright. So that can be a disturbance, especially when you're trying to close all the light out at night. Isn't always available. The other thing that I was thinking about is that the sign that's on that drive that you're talking about, that drive is fairly steep, and a little bit, it's got a drain there, it's got all kinds of changes in topography.
It's not ideal, that's for sure.
Yeah, it can smash up your car if you're going a little too fast. So that may be an issue as far as using that as a main entrance from Governor's Way. I know that's the only way you can get there. But the other issue with regard to that is, I've noticed that Honda parks a lot of cars along the boundary of that property with their dealership. Now, some of those may be employees, some of them may be brand-new cars, but I'm a little curious as to why they wouldn't park them in front of their own dealership and use this property to actually park the cars. So it's just a question that I have. So when you start talking about parking plans, it might be something to think about. I don't know how many people work there, but judging from the traffic in the morning and in the afternoon, there's a fair number of people that work at that dealership.
Do you know how long the site's been vacant?
This particular site, I don't know that it's vacant now. They still advertise that they're open.
The restaurant?
Yeah.
Yeah, as
It
a
is?
restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Wow.
And it's
Yeah.
really good, too.
Is it?
Who would have guessed?
So,
If they don't do something, it won't be there very long.
all right. But that, I agree, that particular part of the property which faces Governor's Way, that's always kind of been a bit of an eyesore because they don't care. They don't take care of it. It's not parking for customers because it's all out front or along the side. But I'm just, I would be curious to know, why the Honda dealer has to park cars on their adjoining property.
See,
They
my
certainly have
theory
enough
was going to
parking.
be it was vacant and they're taking advantage of it, but if it's
It's not
vacant, nix that.
Unfortunately, that's not in our docket tonight, so I don't know we're going to be able to do much about that.
Okay, but as far as going forward, I appreciate you thinking about our residences. We've got 48 of them right across Governor's Way. So any kind of lighting, cars, anything that generates more traffic, like down at the other end, which we're going to have the world's largest Chevrolet dealer, which we also did not know about until it was too late. I'd appreciate somehow to communicate with us a little bit more. We have a management company that basically takes care of a lot of what goes on in our neighborhood. But anybody in the neighborhood, as long as they get notified, would be great. I don't know who got notified, if anyone. got notified for this.
There usually are public notices for the meetings.
Okay.
I know the township sends out, I get an email from the township about what's happening in Symmes. I don't know if it's monthly or,
Yeah, I
But they
I
always
try to get on
reference
the
zoning
site
issues.
to see what's
Yeah,
going on.
if you
but
get
it
the
doesn't-
newsletter,
Yeah.
it's, all of our activity is on that newsletter.
But it would be nice to know early enough so that we could, maybe resolve some of these things before it gets too far. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Could I
Well,
just
we'll
mention
clo-
one other thing?
Yes?
I'm not quite on the same page that Tom is. This is a car dealership, and to me, I know what Enterprise does when they sell their cars. It's not as intensive as Honda is, or McCluskey would be, or anybody else. It would probably be a welcome business there, as long as we're taking care of what it's done, as far as the buffer or something like that we're talking about. So we can't see it, they can't see us, and the lighting is a concern, and I know they're coming back with a lighting plan at some point, so I don't know if we have the ability to address that or not, but we hope you do. Okay?
Thank you.
So just with regard to the lighting plan, since we discussed that, I think your plan is to review the lighting plan and make sure that it's,
It is a plan that we can review and make sure that it complies with the street front. I mean, they're adjacent to a street, and the street line is where the 0.5-foot candles would have to occur. So it should be far less than 0.5 by the time it crosses the street and gets over to the condo property lines.
do you know what your plans are for lighting? Are you going to have lights on all night long? Are you going to shut them off at certain hours?
We typically leave them on.
Car dealerships.
So more of a security and risk assessment, just deters unwanted activity.
So now that we've become experts at car dealership lighting configurations, I have become aware that there's technology that allows, it to be dimmed to a kind of a minimum lighting during late night hours, but would go on if it detects movement, things like that, to a brighter amount. Is that something you've contemplated?
We've used that at some sites where it makes sense. We'd have to look at it once we get the analysis done, because I don't, from the pole placement today, if we're trying to just make sure it's secure, I don't think it's going to be as bright as you often look at condos. They're bright, right? But just with the placement of the poles, I think it might be challenging to dim them at night. But we can certainly look at it. We're open to looking at it.
Yeah.
Can I make one other point that just one of the gentlemen brought up, and I just want to make sure that we understand? On the back, we're of course willing to work on the shrubbery behind the building. But if those are display vehicles on that back row, they're going to be backed in versus pulled in forward. So customer cars will pull in forward, right, when a customer comes in. But display cars, we will back in for our customers so they can just leave the lot, pull straight out into the lot. I don't know if that makes a difference, makes it more desirable to put a display there versus customer cars, but that would be the difference.
You're talking back on Governor's Way?
Mm-hmm.
Is a practical matter, our customers aren't going to park back there, are they? And they're going to park at the front of the store.
As a practical matter, that's why we didn't show it.
Right.
If it's a mandated matter, we have to figure out.
The concern, I'm receptive or sympathetic to their point of having more landscaping there. I'm trying to balance a streetscape, which is nice, we all like that, especially at stores, versus a buffer, which you see more along the lines of a residential. And I guess one concern I have with a buffer is that going to be a security issue with your display cars. If you can't see it from Governor's Way, does that then say to Mr. Criminal, hey, I got an opportunity here to break into these? I want to try and balance that somehow.
Yeah, I mean, in my perfect world, we would balance it and not have it completely screened, because depending on the criminal, that's an open door in a lot of ways. But we certainly respect the needs of the adjacent residential community we want to work with on. But I'm with you, I think a balance of screening versus
The buffer.
the buffer.
I'm waiting for Brian to come up with a plan for me.
they could cure the hearing problem. They can't.
True.
Anything else? Okay, we'll close the public portion and the committee will discuss.
I did have one more
Oh.
question for Brian, so we can
Okay.
still discuss, but Enterprise has indicated that the vehicles that they park in back for display aren't going to have any advertising or promotional items on them. I believe them, but if a couple years from now, someone else takes over and they start to put all kinds of promotional stuff back there, that's not fair to the residents. Do we have the ability to put a condition or restriction on it?
Yes, you do. That, along with any of the other loudspeakers. You do have the ability to restrict the use of loudspeakers and the use of sale decorations, or whatever term that you can come up with,
I'm thinking that
on the vehicles to the rear.
that the service bays need to be closed during operation of the service area as
Yep.
well.
You can do that as well.
Remember all of these.
I'm taking notes over here.
I have a bunch of notes, but I don't know if I'm any better off.
I guess to start off my thoughts, I mean, it seems like the residents don't really have an issue with Enterprise. I don't think we certainly have an issue with Enterprise. So I think that's all a good thing. I do have a concern about the wall-mounted sign on the back side of the building. We've never approved that in the past. I think it would be a bad precedent to begin to change that now, even with the concept that it's not truly a backside, that it's, that it's a street side as well, but I just don't think that we ought to approve that. I like the idea of having the monument sign, and, if I would approve, the 4 square foot monument sign, and if they want to come back and appeal that or send in a supplemental request, take that to consideration at that point. And I like the idea of not having the loudspeakers, of keeping the garage door closed, and I think that actually those display vehicles do provide a bit of a buffer between the activity in the parking lot and the street, and then therefore the residential places. So I'd be probably apt to just go with the streetscape buffer.
When you say streetscape buffer, you mean one that, I thought streetscape was not a buffer. It was just.
The tall trees, the shade trees, and the shrubberies.
It's a type of buffer. There's boundary buffers and there's streetscape buffers. They're both called buffers in the code.
Okay, I will say, in light of being sensitive to the residential, I would like to see it be more extensive than we talked about initially.
Okay.
How do we do it? If that's the route we want to go, how do we use the so-called hybrid that you said I had to come up with tonight? You seem reluctant.
So, well, I mean, the option is, the code has 2 10-foot wide buffer options, boundary buffer or streetscape buffer. To do something different, I mean, you as a commission can't place, or as a commission, you can't place a condition that says we want more buffering. I mean, it has to be, we want 10 additional trees and 20 additional shrubs, or something specific so that we can enforce it as staff. We don't have the discretion to come up with what your intent was when you said more. So it either has to be something that I can point to in the code, or you have to be specific like that. That's what I meant.
Well, since we haven't actually seen I think we have really 2 choices. One is 3 choices: streetscape, or the other buffer, I forget what we're calling that,
Boundary.
or a continuation. And we'll actually take a look at it and come back in a month and tell them we want 1 more shrubbery.
Can I be specific in the sense of a streetscape buffer, streetscape buffer, including 5 evergreens?
Yes, a streetscape buffer that meets the requirements of the code plus 5 additional evergreen trees, yeah.
But we don't know if that's enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's, we'd have to stay this and come back and actually.
I was gonna say,
look
what
at
if we do a continuation and next
Well,
month we look at the lighting plan and we look at,
I can show you what we set at the landscape plan that shows how we're meeting the streetscape requirement. So it was 20 shrubs for every 100 feet, and then 1.5 tree for every 100 feet. We have about 200 feet. So we have 3 additional trees, plus there's some kind of existing tree that's there. And then we are showing currently 43 shrubs, so 3 additional.
but to me, a shrub means something about this tall.
Sure, like 3 or 4 feet high.
And I think what we want is something higher.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm thinking like a.
Probably not 15 feet, but
Arborvitae,
something that's, at least 8.
to give them some, to give it a little bit more density. I'm not looking for literally a fence of arborvitaes, but something that balances your streetscape with their needs, especially as they come out that drive.
Sure.
And then, of course, you have security issues with the vehicles there, but I don't have enough expertise to say, okay, add 5
Well,
evergreens or 10 evergreens or.
I mean, I think
No
to
less than-
their benefit, they haven't had a chance to look at it and either agree or oppose to it either. So, it seems to me like we're being
You may not
rather
want one,
arbitrary in our decision-making here. If we say, well, add 3 arborvitaes and we're okay with it. I mean,
Right,
that's,
Yeah, I don't know. Not.
yeah.
So I'm thinking we need to continue it and get lighting and landscaping specifics.
With just those 2 issues, can we decide on other stuff and then they come back for those 2 issues, or do we continue everything? What's the recommendation?
Everything,
Everything?
yeah.
Okay. So if they come back with a landscape plan and/or lighting plan that's specific, we can at that point address whether or not it needs to be modified along with the other modifications.
Correct, like you can't, you can't approve a portion of their request and then continue a portion of their request. If you continue it, it has to be continued all. If you approve it, it has to be all approved.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Jana, when would the next meeting be?
3rd week of December. 3rd Wednesday of December.
Which is what?
15th, I think.
Okay.
Will you be available for that meeting, Jana?
From,
You'll have a whole
Is that right?
slew of birthdays thereafter.
That you won't have to work.
I got busy.
That's right.
Yeah, I just don't think we
Yeah.
can.
Just assign a random number. I'm not a landscape architect or landscape designer, but.
Well, I think, particularly since they have some concerns about this, it ought to go in the public record and,
Well, and I think both sides are
Yeah.
trying to be reasonable
Right.
and sensitive to the other, but it's hard to make a decision when you don't really know what it looks like. And I think what we're asking for is something greater than what's in the draft of the plan. So does that mean at this point we make a motion to continue?
I think she has a question. Are you looking for more guidance from us?
Yeah, and just so I understand, so you can't approve the other conditions?
It's all or none.
Just make it subject to an approved lighting plan and approved landscape plan?
we could
No.
do that, but we're not inclined to do that.
Brian just said no.
No, you can't, actually. There's no mechanism for a final development
thought
plan
you were going
modification
to-
request
We could
to
bequeath
be
the
split, no.
decision-making to you.
I mean, there's a public hearing, it's open. The only way for you to take action is to close the public hearing and then take action. And you can't close the public hearing if you're continuing the public hearing, so there's no logistical way for that to happen.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
Second that motion.
Mr. Reichman?
Yes.
Mr. Kessler?
Yes.
Ms. Bucco?
Yes.
Looks like we'll be in Bombay for another month.
I encourage you to go there. It's really, it's
What is it?
It's Indian.
Where?
The Bombay,
Oh.
existing one.
Okay, I guess, here's my agenda.
Old business, new business, admin, there you go.
Thank you. Do we have any old business, Janet?
No.
Do we have any new business, other than this continuation? Any administrative matters?
None.
Can I get a motion for adjournment?
I'll motion to adjourn.
I'm happy to second that.
Ms. Pugo?
Yes.
Mr. Kessler?
Yes.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.